Hey buddy, welcome to Shark Jets. I'm Skidvis. In my last video, I showed you how to make World of Warcraft style achievement notifications in your Discord bot. And I wanted to follow that up with something a little more entertaining, perhaps. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to make a quick and simple graphical game for your Discord bot. The options that you can come up with are going to be endless. Well, pretty close to endless, I guess. I don't know. But anyways, we're gonna get into that real quick. But first, do me a huge favor. Come on, man. I need your help. Like and subscribe. Thank you. I'm trying to get to 100 so I can get my URL fixed. That's all I'm trying to do. Help me. All right, enough of that. Let's get started. Okay, here we are once again in Visual Studio. The first step, as usual, is to have a working bot. So if you don't have a bot or it doesn't work, check out these links and learn how to make a bot. So I'm gonna run my bot and make sure that it's working. Okay, and as we know, my bot just tells me a message to say that it's running. So we are good to go. Stop that. The next step is to install some NuGet packages. I actually already have them installed because I am going off of my last video, but it's called Image Sharp. And it is a pre-release package, so make sure this is checked if you don't have it checked. And you're looking for these two packages, 6labors.imagesharp and 6labors.imagesharp.drawing. We're going to need those to manipulate images. So once you have those installed, we can go ahead and add some images. I've gone ahead and done that already. I have an images folder here in my project. And I've created a folder called Voke because I'm a big fan of Star Trek Discovery, and that's what I'm calling this part of the bot. So in this Voke folder, I've got a bunch of assets that I have downloaded from this free image asset. I'll put the links to this in the description, but basically what I've done is I've created folders for all of the characters and sets that I'm going to have. So I've got this folder called Bad, which has all the enemies. I have a folder called Badges, which has just a badge where I'm going to place text. If you followed my last video, that should be familiar to you. The PSD is just where I keep the originals. The sets is where I keep all the backgrounds. So you can see we have the backgrounds from that asset pack. And then under tunes, that's where we have the actual player characters. So I've split those up into different versions of the images, and we'll come back to that in a second. So once we have our images where we need them and how we need them, we want to create another command. So let's go into our commands folder and create a new class. And I will call this Voke Commands. Okay, so since this is a command, we're going to need to inherit from the base command module as usual. And again, in order for a base command module to work, you need to have D# plus commands next. So make sure that is in there. And then I'm just going to go ahead and punch in the command real quick, and then we'll break it down. All right, so here we are at the beginning. The first step is, of course, to create the command alias. So whenever we type in the command Voke, this is going to happen. So we created a public async task called Voke. It takes a command context parameter called CTX. And then we start creating a bunch of assignments. This looks massive, but it's really quite simple once you know what's going on. So the first thing I do is create a font variable that is of type font. We did this in the last video. We're going to create an Arial font, and it's the size, the default size for it is 25. So we'll be using that as every time we're writing something to the image, we're going to use this default font unless we need to modify it. The next thing I'm doing is creating a variable called baddies, and this will be a list of just the names of all the bad guys. So in my images folder, in the bad images, evoke bad, I've got a bunch of enemies, and those will correspond to the list of bad guys that I just created. So for bat, I have this bat. For dino, I have a dino right here. And for dragon and ghost, also those images are in this folder. So we have those, so we're just declaring those file names basically, just the prefixes for them as our enemies. And then we'll do the same with the heroes, right? But I'm calling them tunes. I created a variable called tunes. It's another list, and I have the same thing under my tunes folder. I have 3 different characters with different images for the different positions that they can have. So a bowman, a mage, and a wizard. The next variable is called player name, and that's quite simply going to pull the Discord member's username so that we know who's playing the game. The next thing we're going to do is create a variable called RND, and it's just going to be a random object. So this is how we're going to get random numbers throughout the game. The next one is a variable called opponent, and we're going to take and make use of this random variable immediately. We're going to go through our list of bad guys and just pick a random bad guy based on the count of bad guys, pick a random number, and that will be our opponent. So we're picking a random opponent. We'll do the same thing with the heroes. So we're going to go to our new variable here called tune, and it's going to go through the tunes list and randomly pick a hero. We'll do the same thing yet again with background images. I've got a folder called sets, which is where I keep all my backgrounds. They're numbered from 1 through 24, so we're just going to go into that folder and randomly pick a number from 1 through 24, and that will be our background image for the battle. The next one is a variable called badge, and here we're just going to load in that badge image that we created so that we can use it later on. The next step is to determine whether or not the player has won. In your game, you might want to add some logic. You might want to maybe see how tough the bad guy is, or how strong the hero is, or what weapon the hero has equipped, or whatever you want to do. In my case, I'm simply doing a coin flip. I'm generating a random number from 1 to 2, or for 0 to 1. If it's a 1, the player wins. If it's not, the player loses. It's real simple. Like I said, you might want to add more logic there to your game to make it more interesting, but for me, a coin flip was good enough. And so that's what this player has won variable. It's a Boolean. It's either going to be true or false if the player has won. We're going to use that from now on to determine what to do. So we have a variable called earned XP, and this is just a really quick way to assign XP. Basically, we're doing what's called a ternary operator, which is basically a really compact if statement. So we're checking to see if the way they work is anything before the question mark is evaluated to true or false. If it's true, then the first thing after the question mark happens. If it's false, then the thing after the colon happens. So basically this is saying if player has won is true, right? So we're setting it up here. If it's a 1, it'll be true. If it's not a 1, it'll be false. So if player has won is true, then our earned XP variable is going to have a value of 2. If player has won is false, then we're going to have an earned XP value of 1. So we're going to keep doing that further down the page here. We're going to determine the player status, right? Did the player win or lose? We've already determined that up here, but I need this text for getting the right image. So we've got a variable called player status. It's going to check if the player has won, then the string in that variable will be win. If the player didn't win, then the string will be lose. And we do the same thing for the opponent, but in the reverse, right? So if we have a variable called opponent status, and if the player has won, then that means that the opponent has lost. If the player hasn't won, then the opponent has won, right? So we're doing this just for file names, just because we're dealing with images that have the words win or lose on the end of them. I'll show you that in a second. This next variable here just lists who's fighting, right? So it's got a string that says player name versus opponent. So we determined that up there. We created a random player name. Oh no, we don't. We created a player name variable which has the username, but then we created a random variable for the bad guy's name, the opponent's name. So that's what that's saying. It's just basically saying Discord player versus monster's name. And then we have another string here, which is just a variable called XP text, which simply says XP plus and how much XP we've earned, which we determined up here. It's either going to be 2 or 1. This is just a way for me to display whether you've earned more points or not. Just to give an example of how to display more text in here. All right, now we're actually going to load the images, right? So I've got a variable called image player, and we're loading images into that. So we're going into our folders here. We've got the image folder, the Vogue folder, the tunes folder, and here's where these file names come into play. So as you can see, we're going to get the string that's in the tune variable and the string that's in the player status variable. So if we go look at the hero names real quick, you'll see, for instance, here's mage. We've got several poses for the mage. We've got mage-lose, mage-ok, mage-win. So I was going to do a lot more stuff, make it more complicated, and I probably will in the future, but for this example, we're only going to use win or lose. So as you can see, there's mage-lose and mage-win. So if we've determined that the player has won, this player status variable will be win. So let's assume the tune is mage. So we're going to find the file called mage-win.png. So that's in that list of files that I showed you. And I have the same exact thing going on with the bad guys. I've got another variable called image opponent, and we're going to load that image. We're going to go into the images folder, the Vogue folder, the bad folder, which is where we have all of our bad guys. And then we're going to match that image or the opponent name that we randomly picked above. We're going to match that in the opponent status. So if the player won, then this is going to be lose. If the player lost, then this is going to be win. So we'll find a file, for instance, let's say the opponent name is bat. If the player won, we're going to look for bat-lose and load that image in. Now, here's the most complicated part of all this, and it's only complicated at first, right? We need to find a position to place everything, because what we're going to basically be doing is stacking the images that we've loaded here, the player image, the opponent image, the badge image, and the background. We're going to just basically be stacking them all together and then merging them. So we need to determine where we're going to place these images, and that's what this section here does. So these are all points which are just x and y coordinates. So as you know, an image starts with an x and y coordinate of 0, 0, and then it goes through the length of it for the x coordinates and through the height of it for the y coordinates. So that's what we're doing here, where we're setting images, or setting positions for the images. So for instance, the left position where our leftmost player is going to be, which in our case is going to be the hero, right? What we're doing is we're going to set its X position to 10 pixels in, right? Because we don't want them right at the edge of the screen. We want to leave a little 10 pixel padding to where the character is going to be placed on the left side. And then as far as the height is concerned, we want to center it on the image. So I'm getting the background image that we picked up earlier, and I'm finding its height because we want to know how tall the image is. And then we want to divide that number by 2, which is going to give us the middle of the background vertically. So that's what we're doing here. And then if we were to just place the bad guy or the player in that position, then they wouldn't be centered because we're putting their top left position there. And so they would be a little below center. So we want to remove half the height of the character so that we bring them up and they're actually centered. That's what this is doing. It's not really complicated, but it can be a little intimidating if you're looking at it for the first time. So we're doing the same thing. In my case, this says left position. This is where the enemy is going to be. So we're getting the image for the enemy. We're getting its height and dividing it by 2. That'll give us the middle of the enemy's image. And then we're just subtracting the middle of the background from the middle of the character so that we're actually placing him vertically at the right place. And then we do the same thing for the right position. This is where the actual player is going to be. So we're doing a little different. We want to get him at the right edge of the image. So we're getting the background image's width, and then we're subtracting the player's width. That way, as I said, that whenever you place something, you're placing it at a 0, 0 position, which means it's at the very top left of the image. So if you're placing a character at the width of the background, it'll be actually outside of the background. So we want to subtract the width of the player character to bring him inside that image. And you can play with these numbers so that you can see what I'm talking about. If you don't do the math the way that I'm showing you here, if you subtract or get rid of this division or get rid of this subtraction, you'll see how the characters move slightly off center. So that's what we're doing here. We're setting the right position for the player. Same thing with the height that we did above it. We're just centering it vertically. And then we're going to do something similar with the badge, right? The badge that we're going to display it at the bottom of the image. So we're getting the background width and then the badge width divided by 2. That way we're centering the badge horizontally. And then as far as the height goes concerned, or the vertical, we're getting the background height and we're subtracting the badge's height. So we're pulling it up from the bottom so that it aligns up nicely. Again, you can go ahead and play with these numbers and see how it manipulates it. It's not as complicated as it looks. I know it's intimidating. I hate math. I'm not very good at it, but this is really simple once you understand it. So you just got to play with it for a few minutes to understand. We're doing the same thing with text position, right? This is literally where we're going to write our text, where we're going to write player versus opponent, XP, whatever. So we need to figure out where that's going to be. In this case, I'm using the badge position, right? I want to know where the badge is. So I'm getting the badge's X position and I'm adding 10 to it because I want it 10 pixels in from the left. I'm getting the Y position for the Y, and I'm adding 10 pixels to that because I want it 10 pixels down from the top. Pretty simple. All right, so this is the most intimidating block, but you can play with this and you're not going to blow up your computer. Just move things around and understand what's happening. Each one of these is just generating X and Y coordinates to determine where to place our characters. All right, now comes the meat and potatoes of how this works. We're going to create a new variable called clone, and we're going to clone our background image. We don't want to modify our actual background image, so we're making a copy of it and assigning it to this clone variable. And in here, this block here, we're creating a variable called IPC, which is the image processing context, which is basically how this library works to manipulate an image. So we're creating a variable called IPC, and then we're creating a little block here to do things to this drawing or to this image. So we're just going to call a few methods here. So the first one we're going to call is IPC.drawImage, which is literally going to place an image on top of another image. So we've got our background image as our main image, right? We've cloned it. We've created a copy of our background image, and that's what everything is going to be working on top of. So we're drawing our image opponent, which we declared up here. So we have this image, Vogue, bad, whatever. We have that image in that variable, and then we're telling it where to draw it. So that's this left position, 10 pixels in from the left, half the height of the image, right? So that's what that's saying. And then this last parameter here is opacity. It's a number from 0 to 1, and it basically determines how transparent you want the image to be. In our case, we want it to be fully opaque, so we set it to 1, but if you wanted to make like a ghost or something that's semi-transparent, you could change this number to 0.5 or 0.75 or whatever, and you'll play with the transparency of how it draws this image. We do the same thing again for the player this time. We do IPC draw image. We're picking the player image variable that we created up here. We're setting it to the right position, which is up here. And then we're setting its opacity to 1 to make it fully opaque. And then in my case, I'm doing this one thing here. I'm flipping the image horizontally. And if you're paying attention, you might be noticing that the left position and the right position kind of don't actually make sense. But it's because the assets that I have are facing the wrong way. So what I do is I draw all the images on top of the background, and then I flip the background, or flip the image, so that I have the hero on the left side and the enemy on the right side. If I take this off, everything still works, but the hero is on the right side and the enemy's on the left side, and I just don't like the aesthetic of that. So I flip it around. So that's all this is doing. It's ipc.rotate_flip. You can rotate or flip it, clearly. We're saying rotate mode is none. We don't need a rotation. We're setting flip mode to horizontal. So if we wanted to flip something vertically, you do that vertically. If you wanted to rotate something, you do it in here. But in our case, we're just flipping the image so that the hero is on the left side and the enemy is on the right. Second to last in this block here, we're drawing the badge, right? That's just that little rectangle that we're going to put our text on. So we have a variable called badge up here somewhere that we have loaded with that badge image. And then there's the badge position, which we determined here will be 10 pixels from the top of from the bottom of the image. So, all right. So the next and final thing here is we're actually writing text to that badge image, or on top of that badge image. So we're calling this ipc.drawText method, and then we're passing it a interpolated string where we're going to just basically show different variables that we have. So in there we have our fighters variable, which is going to say player name versus opponent. We have our XP text. We're separating everything with a new line, so we're just basically hitting a character return there. So then we are showing what the XP earned was. And then on the next line, we're saying the player's name, and then a space, and then the player's status. So it would be like, mark win or mark lose. But that sounds like a caveman is talking, so I added an S at the end of it. So it'll say mark wins or mark loses. And then we're passing it the font that we need. So we created that font at the very beginning. It's Arial 25. If you wanted to change the font, you can do it here, or you just pass it the one that we had up at the top. And then we pick a color for that font. This is just an enumerator. You can do color.blue, color.red, color.orange, whatever you want. And then lastly, we send it the position. Where do we want the text to be placed? We want it to be placed 10 pixels in from the badge, right? Wherever the badge is, add 10 pixels to that, put it down there. And then finally, we are going to create a file name for this image that we just generated. In my case, I created a folder called fights in my images folder. So I'm saving it to images, fights, voke.png, right? That's the file name I'm determining. And then I save the file because it has to be saved to your system before you can transmit it in Discord. So we do clone.save and pass it the file name that we created up here. And then finally, we send it to Discord. So we do an await CTX channel, send file async, and send it the file. And that will go ahead and send the file to the chat channel that the command was executed in. All right, so we should be good to go. Last but not least, I need to add this command file to the bot. So we'll go into our bot's command file here and go to where we register the commands. Copy paste this, change this to Voke commands. Should be good. Save it and build it. All right, build succeeded. Now let's launch this baby and see what we did wrong. All right, the bot started up okay. Now I'm gonna come in here and just type in Voke as my command and see what happens. All right, well, that worked. As you can see, my spacing is off there at the bottom of this image. Let me just maximize this real quick. So it picked our random background, it picked our random hero, it picked our random monster, and then right here, this text block where I put in this text, each one is separated by a new line. You can see that since we won, Skidvis wins, we get 2 XP instead of 1. Now let's go ahead and run it again. Alright, so here we are again. As you can see, the image is different this time. I have lost. It says Skidvis loses. My image is defeated, and the dragon it picked is gloating. And you can see Skidvis versus dragon. I only got 1 XP this time because I lost. To change this, we can do several things to fix this thing at the bottom here. We can either resize the font, pick a smaller font, or just put it after this here, after the XP text. We have many options. I'm just going to go ahead and change the font to a smaller number. So we'll go ahead and stop this and go back to our Vogue file. Change this from maybe, it wasn't that far off, so maybe just 20. And we'll run that again. All right, and I'll do evoke. And there we have it. A much better image, much better font size. It fits all 3 lines, and you can just play with it like that. You can actually get into some very fancy stuff where you're centering text, which I did in the last video, and you can even pull stuff in from the right, put some icons on the right side maybe, or whatever you want. This is just the beginning. You can do so many things, and it's really not that complicated. The hardest issue was probably figuring out the math as to where everything goes. But you can tinker with it and just add and change things as you need to. And there you have it, quick and easy, just like I said. The most complicated stuff is figuring out where the pixels go, and that's something you can just fine tune. If you've done CSS and HTML, you're familiar with finding the right place for things, and that's all that is. It's not complicated math, it's just math. And so if that puts you off, I know how you feel, man. I know how you feel. But if you found this video helpful, please do me a favor, like and subscribe, please. All right. Also, I want to thank Ali, because Ali is my Patreon subscriber who kicked this whole thing off. He asked a question. I don't even think this is what he was looking for, but this is the road I took. So thanks a lot, Ali. And if you want to try this bot, my Vogue bot, join my Discord. It's in there. Just hit Vogue, and you'll be able to level up and play and see how it works. And also, if you want to become a Patreon member, that's cool. Help me make my games. All right, I'm still Skidvis. Peace out.